Huh? Okay, everyone. How are you doing? Come on. What do you want? A lot. Welcome to our beer tasting today. I am Kirk Bankstead, and I own the Minocqua Brewing Company. And I'm wearing my 2XL onesie that came in one day too late for our drag show party. And I figure we only got a couple more days left of Pride Month, so I wanted to throw it on there for you today. So you've made it to Minocqua. We are one of the most bucolic, idyllic cities in the state of Wisconsin. I hope you enjoy yourself while you're here. This little bar and little tap room in the middle of Minocqua is home of the most progressive and liberally political brewery in the entire country, I would dare say, but for sure in the state of Wisconsin. So what I do when I do these beer tastings every Friday and Saturday is I tell you stories about all the wine and the beer that we produce. And I talk a little bit about the stories behind them and about the politics behind them. So if you want free beer and free wine, you got to listen to me talk a little bit about politics. I hope you're okay with that. Okay, so first of all, we are going to pour, because I want to be nice to your palates. So I want to give you our wine first, because the rest of it's going to be beer, and I don't want to mix beverages. So we're going to pour our Sauvignon Blanc first. It's called Choice Sauvignon Blanc. There's a great story behind this. We made Choice as a beer. This label, it's got the female sign right there, and it's got a little bit of a doily around the O, and that stands for Ruth Bader Ginsburg's doily that she wore around her collar. So this is every bottle of wine we sell. We donate money to reproductive rights groups around the country. I originally made that label when Roe v. Wade was overturned and Wisconsin women were no longer able to get abortions. Thank God, a few years have gone by and that has changed. Thanks to our progressive Supreme Court in Wisconsin. I made it originally as a beer label, but usually people who care about reproductive rights are generally women and generally older women. And older women over the age of 35 generally drink wine more than beer. So I made this label and I couldn't sell it for beer, but all of a sudden I found a wine partner willing to work with me. And we're selling, it sells great now because it matches the demographic of the people who usually are going to drink it. And I always carry it in our tap rooms because we have 75% of our followers on Facebook, and we have about 235,000 now, are women over the age of 35. So I got to carry wine in my tap rooms, or else I need to serve that demographic. This in particular is a beautiful Sauvignon Blanc from Pine Mountain in Sonoma County, and I've gotten to really know some of the makers over there. I go there about 3 or 4 times a year. Equality Vines is co-owned by Jim Obergefell. And Jim Obergefell was in the Supreme Court case called Obergefell v. Hodges, which was in 2015, and it gave us marriage equality. So the quick story there is that Jim Obergefell was a gay man from Ohio. His partner was dying, and because of the strict rules and laws in Ohio, he wasn't able to visit him in the hospital at the end of his life. He wasn't able to sign any of the power of attorney documents that you have to sign during that time. He wasn't able to arrange all the stuff you got to arrange to go to a funeral. And I would argue that if you look at it from this point of view, not being able, you got to have a heart of stone to think that somebody who loves somebody else shouldn't be able to do all those things for that person at the end of their life. And so that's why, if you look at it from that angle, it's a pretty hard case to beat. And that's why it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and they won marriage equality. At least, gay couples can get married and enjoy all the same legal benefits that marriage gives to us all. And so they co-own Equality Vines. They have a great tap room in Guerneville, Sonoma County, and they make this wine for me. So I've got to be good friends with them, and that's why I wanted to introduce you to the next beer we have, which is called Love Wins. And there's a reason. I make this for Pride Month every single June. And like I said, I've gotten fatter since the first time I had to wear my onesie, and so I had to order a new onesie, and it didn't get to me when we had a drag show. We had a big drag show a week ago because there was apparently a MAGA protest that was supposed to happen across the street from us, and I'd be damned if I was going to let MAGA ruin the good times of my customers. So I hired a bunch of drag queens from all over Wisconsin and Minnesota, and we had a big drag party and pride party last week. So thus the garb. So Equality Vines, I gave them one of my labels. They let me have one of their labels. So the big hashtag when that Supreme Court case was won, it was called Love Wins. And Equality Vines has a beautiful art installation that says Love Wins in their tap room. And I've been on the ropes so many times, I've had to get bailed out by people donating to us. So I've sold cans. We made a can installation called Love Wins behind our bar. And the story is they made a wine for me, and I made a fruited sour for them. And they sell this in their tap rooms in Sonoma County. I made a fruited sour because it's a really popular beer for the summertime, and June and Pride Month is the summertime. So I asked them, I was like, guys, I got one issue here. I know it's going to sell well. People love sours, but the word fruity has definitely been used as a disparaging remark against the gay population. So I want to make sure you're okay with that. They're like, if you're going to make a gay beer, you better fucking make it fruity. So thank you. Sorry. And the kid wasn't here, so I was able to say that without being too nasty. So that's why it's our fruited sour, and it's our beer for Pride. And I'm really proud of it. And we give money for this one. We give money to Family Equality, and in Wisconsin, their association is located in Whitewater, but it's a national organization, and it helps the gay and lesbian couples adopt children. So that's what some of the proceeds of this beer go to. Okay, now we are going to move to kind of the non-pride part of the situation, and our flagship beer is called Resistance Pilsner, and it's kind of the first beer that we have, and this beer was not supposed to look like this. This beer was supposed to, instead of having the Statue of Liberty on the front and four presidents that I think helped defend America when we needed it most, which was George. You can look over there too. It's easier to see. It's George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, and Franklin Roosevelt. That's the same image of this can. This wasn't supposed to look like this. Instead of the Statue of Liberty, it was supposed to have Kamala Harris there. And instead of these four presidents, it was supposed to have the four African Americans she had to stand on the shoulders of four other African Americans in history in order to get to be the first black female president, which would have been Martin Luther King, in my opinion. It would have been Rosa Parks. It would have been Ruby Bridges, who was the first black girl to go to a segregated school in the South. And of course, it would have been Barack Obama, who was the first black president we had. So it was called Madam President, but that label was never made. And you can see a picture of that label behind our bar. I should have brought it up with me today. I always forget. We never made the label. So if you were all as sad as I was when you woke up on like November 5th, 2 years ago, and we're like, Jesus Christ, this again? I don't know if we can handle this again. If you were mad, just think about how sad I was. Not only was I worried about the president, I had made 30 barrels of beer that I no longer had a label for anymore. So we came up with this label in a day, and it's our flagship for the until he's gone and until fascism is gone in America. Now let's talk about resistance. As soon as Trump was elected, not only did we make this beer, but I started calling people in Wisconsin. First of all, I read an essay by Professor Erica Chenoweth who is the Kennedy School Professor of Government at Harvard University. She wrote a beautiful essay, and I encourage you to all read it, that talks about what to do when authoritarian governments take over America. So it kind of was a blueprint for what we have to deal with right now. And I read that, and it said start networking with all the groups you can, so that you can all help each other when you need to. So I reached out to Emilio Del Torre at the Turners, which is like a socialist YMCA across from the Bucks Field, whatever it's called. It's the stadium down in Milwaukee. And then I reached out to, I teamed up with a Bernie organizer named Simon Rosenblum Larson, Bernie Sanders organizer, who is a minor league baseball player and turned political organizer for Bernie. He's down in Madison. And ultimately, those early meetings formed what's called the Fighting Oligarchy Coalition, which is a bunch of groups in Wisconsin who are all trying to swim in the same direction. Hurting progressives is like hurting cats. So it's hard to all swim in the same direction, but we're trying to understand that the bigger issue here and the bigger worry is Trump and Trump's regime stomping on all of our rights and turning our country into something we've never seen before. So they all went their separate ways and at initial stages. And the way that we've kind of gone as an organization is that we're more of a news organization now. And I'll talk about that later when I talk about Muckraker. But we're now have a large Substack page called the Minocqua Brewing Company Times, where we try to keep people updated on what's going on politically in Wisconsin and the Midwest. So not only are we part of the resistance movement in Wisconsin, but I've been fighting a personal resistance movement at this very tap room for the last 5 years. The town and the county have tried to put me out of business multiple times, and it's because we set up a super PAC that has raised over $2 million to keep Wisconsin blue, and this area is so red that the powers that be that are beyond this town have worked through the town and the county to try to put me out of business from different zoning violations. It's been perfectly clear because usually the lawyer for all of these issues is the same lawyer that works for the Republican Party of Wisconsin. And that guy lives in Waukesha. He doesn't live close to northern Wisconsin where all of these zoning violations happen. So we've been fighting. The one thing that will lead me to my next. So we've been fighting a lot. The one thing that my super PAC has done that I'm very proud of is that we raised a lot of money to try to sue to get rid of the private school voucher system in Wisconsin. Unfortunately, Governor Tony Evers, who's supposed to be our education governor, is also supported by the private school voucher lobby. And so he advocated that the Supreme Court didn't take our case, meaning a Democrat tried to help the voucher school lobby, which the Republicans have been trying to do to kill off our public schools for 30 years. That is why I'm not completely happy with the corporate wing of the Democratic Party in America and in Wisconsin. Okay, let's move to the next one. We have Mount Rushmore Shandy. This is fresh off of a can. We made this as part of a Kickstarter campaign where we raised over $250,000 last February to be able to launch what I call the Minocqua Marketplace. So the Minocqua Marketplace stemmed from them trying to shut me down so often, and it stemmed from being regulated so hard in the beer industry that it's hard for a really progressive guy to do business on his own when you have to depend on retail stores and distributors who are staunchly Republican to help get your beer out to people. So I created this website. We've now got 120 progressive companies that are all selling their stuff on our website called the Minocqua Marketplace. Right now, it's basically what I call a fuck Trump Etsy, because there's a lot of people selling a lot of protest stuff on our site right now, and that's great. And all these people are just as hardcore about small business people, hardcore progressives as I am. But the goal and the reason we raise money, and that's the reason we're putting some of our donors on the front of this can. These are 4 people who gave $500 to our campaign. The reason we put them on the front of the can is that we're changing the Minocqua marketplace, and we are carrying essential goods that we can sell and then give a percentage of those proceeds to mutual aid networks in the places where people are suffering the most, like the protesters in front of Whipple Hall in the Twin Cities, the protesters that are protesting Broadview in Chicago, and the protesters in Delaney Hall in New Jersey. Surely there will be more front lines of the resistance movement that spring up between now and when we kind of get this thing more up and running. But the goal is to sell products that help, that we can donate money to and help, get saline solution, gas masks, and whatever people who are protesting need. Legal services to get out of jail. When if you I don't know if you've been reading the news, but just 4 days ago, 7 Texans who were protesting ICE in Texas, one brought a weapon that discharged, did not kill an ICE officer. That guy got 100 years in prison. The other 6 who just were part of the protest got 30 years in prison. Nobody died. Guess that ICE agent who actually shot Renee Good, he's still an ICE agent. Nothing happened to him, and somebody died on our side. So it shows you the extremes that are happening right now that is not really being talked about enough. When we're not seeing extreme, we're not seeing ICE beating on people, we kind of lose sight of the fact that it still is happening. We just don't have as many cameras on it anymore. All right. Right now it is. So that's our little goal of trying to figure out how to use commerce to try to help fund the protesters. I'm too old and not nimble enough to protest and get bear maced probably, we're not in the throes of it. Wisconsin hasn't seen it like the Twin Cities has and like Chicago. I probably will be in the throes of it if it ever comes to Madison, where I spend my weeks and not my weekends. Okay, next beer. We're going to do Freedom Trail. So remember when I talked about the 4 presidents that we needed most in America to protect us when we were on the ropes as a democracy. So I'm going to talk about the last one first, because your palates deserve to have lighter beers go to darker beers. The last one we made in this series is called Freedom Trail, and there's a Casablanca theme to it. That's like Ingrid Bergman and whatever that dude's name was kissing at the last scene. That happened. Casablanca took place during World War II, during FDR's Franklin Delano Roosevelt's term as president. The resistance movement then, if you were an American or an Allied troop caught behind enemy lines in Germany or in Vichy, France, you had to take the Freedom Trail, which went through Northern Africa, and it went through Casablanca to get to Portugal to get a flight back to America. So this represents the resistance movement that was happening during World War II. One of the reasons I talk about this one first, other than the fact it's a Kolsch and a lighter beer, is because it sets up the stage for a lot of the rest of the stuff I'm going to talk about. So remember when I said we fought for public schools in the state of Wisconsin? Our public schools have gone from like top 5 to like 25 because they have been underfunded because Republicans have ruled our state for 20 years. And one of the dangers of having worse public schools is that kids don't learn about history as much as they should. And now is the time that we need to know history more than almost any other time in our lives. And the reason I say that is that there are parallels to the Weimar Republic that happened right before the Third Reich in Germany that are 100% parallel to what is happening right now in America. And we know exactly what happened in Germany. We know that there was World War II and that hundreds of thousands of Jews were put into concentration camps and slaughtered, and Jews and gypsies and people in the resistance movement. Jews were the leading religion and race, but there were others as well. So we have concentration camps in America right now. They're called detention centers. They're being funded. There's a private corporation called GEO that is getting billions of dollars. $70 billion exactly was appropriated to not only fund ICE, which is the same thing as the German Gestapo that happened 100 years ago or 80 years ago, but we also have detention centers where pregnant women are malnourished and are made to sleep on cold floors. There's a hunger strike happening that I'm not sure if it's still going on, but it was happening as of last week in New Jersey because these Latinos who were in detention centers weren't getting fed and they were getting sick, and the food they were getting fed was rancid and terrible. And so the living conditions in these detention centers are awful. Now, are they getting tortured? Depends on what your definition of torture is. Thank you. So the conditions, we have detention centers, we have the Gestapo, and we also have judges in the Weimar Republic before Hitler came to power. The judges who were in power in Germany, many of them came from the upper crust of Germany because being a judge is a respectable position. Well, the upper crust in Germany were part of the families who were royalty that were disbanded after Germany lost the First World War. So these judges were quite favorable to non-democratic ways of doing things because their families had been kings and princes in World War I. So all of these cases came up with their Supreme Court in the Weimar Republic, and those judges used their own democracy to kill the democracy in Germany. The same thing is happening right now in America. Our Supreme Court is now 7 justices that have been appointed by people who are okay with authoritarianism. Trump appointed like 3 of them. So there's 6 justices that are okay with seeing democracy die. And there's only 3 in the minority who are trying to fight this. We can see this most clearly with how the Supreme Court just came up with a bunch of verdicts in the last week, stripping rights from immigrants, stripping protections from Haitian Americans from seeking asylum. But the most dangerous one that they did was they completely dismantled the Voting Rights Act of the civil rights movement that happened in the 60s. They dismantled it, and what we have seen is that all of the states in the South who fought for owning slaves back in the Civil War are now gerrymandering their states so that blacks in Memphis, St. Louis, and a whole host of other majority black areas do not have representation anymore in the South. So, I'll talk about it more with the next beer because we're going to talk about exactly what led to the civil rights movement, which was the Civil War. Ron, are you pouring Underground Railroad? Perfect, my friend. By the way, this is Ron. Give a hand to Ron. Ron is wearing the t-shirt we made right for him. It's called Ron's Dumpster Koozies. So before this was the Freedomster because we painted it rainbow, and we had to paint it rainbow because the town was trying to put me out of business for not having a covered dumpster, which is one of the craziest reasons to try to put somebody out of business, but they did. By the way, the fascist newspaper across the street from us doesn't have a covered dumpster to this day. You can see it over there. But they try to put me out of business for having one. Ron put a bunch of plywood around this thing to save us from getting shut down, and we called it a dumpster koozie at the time. And we made a t-shirt, said, Ron's Dumpster Koozies, sure to keep the zoning departments away from you. So that's a sidelight for Ron. So let's get back to the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln is the president. The resistance movement during that time was called the Underground Railroad, which of course brought slaves from the South to the northern parts of America and then to Canada. We fought the Revolutionary or the Civil War to free slaves and give black people the right to vote. But as soon as Lincoln was assassinated, his vice president was called Andrew Johnson. And the reason Lincoln picked Andrew Johnson to be vice president is because Lincoln needed to unify the country after the Civil War, but he picked the wrong guy. But he did it for a good reason. He wanted to unify. But Andrew Johnson was a member of the Democratic Party back then, and Lincoln was a member of the Republican Party. And that has, back during the Civil War, the two parties were flipped. The Republicans wanted to free the slaves, and the Democrats were part of the South that wanted to keep their slaves. So back in the day, the Democrats created the KKK. So Andrew Johnson was a member of this group who wanted to keep the slaves, and he was from the South, and he was the vice president. Makes sense when you're trying to unify the country after the Civil War, but when the leader is assassinated, now you get this guy who hoped that the Civil War would have ended differently. And so what happened after we won the Civil War was we were taken right back to the place where we were before the Civil War, because the Reconstruction period was run by Andrew Johnson, which brought Jim Crow laws to America. So think about this. Black slaves had never gone to school, so they started making them take a test in order to vote. Of course, they're going to fail that test and not be able to vote. Black slaves were never paid any money when they were slaves, and then they started instituting poll taxes. So you had to pay in order to vote. Of course, they couldn't pay, so they couldn't vote. All of these Jim Crow laws were put into place to keep blacks from being represented after Lincoln was assassinated. Those laws obviously got changed, eroded over time, but they still were largely in place. Fast forward all the way to the 1960s. When Martin Luther King was fighting for civil rights, Lyndon Johnson was our Democratic Senate leader in the South. Martin Luther King was like, you got to help us. You got to help us. And Lyndon Johnson, being a white male, was like, well, there's a lot bigger fish to fry than giving black people equal rights. We're trying to get people, higher living wage and all this stuff that Democrats want to do. But somehow or another, Democrats often say, just wait your turn. And the turn never comes to black people. And so, but Martin Luther King kept on fighting. They kept on protesting nonviolently. And of course, something happens like Selma, where you have a guy who's my idol called John Lewis, who made the phrase, let's make some good trouble, popular. He was one of the resistance leaders down in Selma, Louisiana, who got his head cracked open by white police when they marched peacefully over that bridge. When things like that were televised, in the advent of black and white television, the rest of America was disgusted. And it finally became time to help the civil rights movement, because enough Americans saw these racist white cops beating the crap out of black people. But it took that. It didn't take white Democrats. It took media to be able to do that, and took leaders like Martin Luther King and that whole movement. So now, the reason I'm saying this is that everything that they fought for led to the Voting Rights Act, and the Voting Rights Act has just been gutted. So we are back to the time before the 1960s civil. We have been pushed back to that time before the 1960s civil rights movement, and that's what we're up against. Now, the good news there is that there is a silver lining. All this gerrymandering going on right now, we're fighting back. Texas tried to gerrymandered all their seats Republican. California fought back and gerrymandered all their seats Democrat to counterbalance that. But there's still more seats that are being gerrymandered in the South. The one thing I think that they don't get, though, is if you think about Texas, where they got like 7 more Republican seats, there's a lot of Latinos in Texas. who voted for Trump because patriarchal stuff is kind of somehow more popular in different Latino kind of cultures, and somehow they thought Trump was good. I tell you right now, there's not a single Latino in America who has seen any of his relatives get disappeared by ICE who's going to vote for Republicans ever again. And so I think by depleting all of these way big majority districts for Republicans and getting them just a little bit majority districts, they're overconfident, because a lot of Latino voters and black and brown voters who might have voted Republican will never do that again. So I still believe if we are allowed to have elections in November, we will take over Congress again, both the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate. However, we have to be allowed to have elections to have that happen, and we're not sure that will happen. And that is what I've been talking about from day one for a year, and is what, unfortunately, most of the Wisconsin politicians who are Democrats are not talking about election protection and how we protect ourselves and make sure that we're allowed to vote in November. That's why I briefly ran for governor, but a guy like this is not quite governor material, I don't think. But I'm one of the few people that is shouting from the rooftops that our current governor and our current governor candidates who are Democrats need to be talking more about how we protect our elections in November. Let's pour some more beer, my friend. I need to lubricate my lips as well here.
Take a drink, sir.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Using this many brain cells while looking like an absolute clown, you gotta.
You look amazing. You look like Elton John.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Pinball wizard.
Goodbye, Norma Jean. Okay. So the next beer we're gonna try is Culper Spyring. So this one, we've talked about Franklin Delano Roosevelt, we've talked about Abraham Lincoln, and now we're talking about George Washington. So the resistance movement during the Revolutionary War, we had a lot of resistance. Basically, we were like the Viet Cong compared to America. Americans were hiding behind trees and shooting with inadequate weapons, and the British had all the might back in the day. The only reason we won the Revolutionary War was because we had a spy network in New York called the Culper Spy Ring that monitored British troop movements and made it possible for George Washington to strike and kill a lot more British than Americans were killed, because he could take them by surprise. So that's the Culper Spy Ring, resistance movement during the Revolutionary War. The reason we had a Revolutionary War is there's a parallel to that, which is happening right now in America as well. The reason we had the Revolutionary War is you had a bunch of American landowners who were wealthy, and the Brits and King George, when they needed more money to fund whatever they were doing in London, started raising taxes to the colonialists in America. And these guys were like, we have nothing to do with what's going on in London. We're in America. We don't want you to raise taxes on us because we don't see any benefits of those taxes. London does. Great Britain does. So that's the reason that they put out this thing called no taxation without representation. That was the rallying cry for the Boston Tea Party, the Stamp Act, and all that stuff. Now, who here lives close to Milwaukee or close to Appleton? Milwaukee? Okay, usually I got both representation. So you had a big flood like a year ago, like in September, almost a year ago. What happened then was and then Appleton and Outagamie County, like Shiocton, had a big flood like a month ago. What usually happens when you have a natural disaster that causes millions of dollars worth of damage is the governor usually declares a state of emergency, and that that initiates certain things that happen in the federal government, like FEMA, which is the Emergency Management Association, it releases money so that FEMA can come and help rebuild. That's the way it usually works. It doesn't work like that anymore because Governor Evers called Milwaukee a disaster area, and Trump refused to open up dollars to have FEMA come and help rebuild Milwaukee. When it happened a month ago to Outagamie County, Evers begged our Republican congressmen to use their influence to try to get Trump to release FEMA dollars to rebuild Wisconsin. We still have not gotten, as far as I know, we still have not gotten a cent of federal dollars to rebuild flooded areas in Wisconsin. And the only reason that is happening is because Governor Evers is a Democrat and our state generally trends blue. It's happened in other blue states as well. When California had a huge fire a couple years ago, there was no help for them. And so we live in an America where we can't depend on our federal government to do one of the most basic things that we pay federal dollars to. Our federal taxes go to help us when there's a natural disaster. That's like pretty basic. So if you're paying federal taxes and your house gets flooded and we're not getting any money back, I would say that is taxation without representation. So one thing that I think, if I were running for governor, and I'm no longer doing that, but if I were a governor in a blue state and money is being withheld, similarly grants that have gone to UW-Madison have been cut entirely. Federal dollars to Head Start has been cut entirely. If you're on Medicare, the federal dollars going to Medicaid have been cut dramatically. So if we're no longer getting help from our federal government, I would argue that blue state governors should band together and create escrow accounts where our federal tax dollars go to those accounts and are not released until we are treated the same as the red states. It seems like a good idea. It seems outside of the box, but it also seems like there's a lot of other things happening outside of the box right now, like brown people getting detained and put in detention centers. So it's time to start thinking outside of the box. So that's my little spiel about no taxation without representation and what we need to be doing to think outside of the box to try to get our basic rights given to us by our Constitution back. Okay, now for the fun one. This is called Fascist Tears over here. And the reason I came out with this one was because, believe it or not, who's heard of Free Beer Day? Thank God.
I thought it was today.
Well, it's to a degree, it's happening right now. To a degree, it's happening right now. Sometime in January, I was a few beers in, and I read something that Trump had done that I didn't like very much. I was a few beers in, and I wrote something on Threads, which is like that's like the most liberal social media platform. It's like Instagram's Twitter. I wrote something on Threads, and I said, free beer the day that he dies, all day long, in both Madison and Minocqua. I went to bed just thinking that was just me just letting off a little steam. I woke up the next day and 30,000 likes. And there was you could pour it, Ron. There was all of a sudden Fox News was writing me for an interview saying, we'd like to interview you about your encouraging the death of our sitting president. I'm like, I'm not encouraging the death. I'm just going to be happy when he dies. And so will the rest of the world, by the way. There will be dancing in the streets the day that Trump dies. And so they try to gotcha moment. Even the Daily Mail in London, which is like this right-wing National Enquirer, they tried to pin me down for saying free beer the day he dies. And I just stuck to my guns because I'm not going to feel ashamed about that in any way. We're all going to be super happy when that day comes. And I guarantee you, because I've made about $200,000 selling T-shirts from that phrase, it was the best accidental marketing campaign I've ever done in my life.
Let's drink to that.
Let's drink to that, right? So I said that in February, and all of a sudden, I probably shouldn't post when I'm 3 sheets to the wind because I always kind of get in trouble. So I was proposing to my girlfriend in April, and I was at Pine Mountain where the grapes are grown. I was talking to my winemaker. I made this whole thing. I bought a ring two months earlier. I was proposing to her, so we were happy. I was about 2 bottles of wine in, and all of a sudden, there's the White House Correspondents' Dinner is happening that day. And I hear over the news, we're driving around the vineyards, and on the news, somebody's assassination attempt against Donald Trump. So we get back to the hotel, and I whip out my phone. I'm like, either a brother or sister in the resistance needs to work on their marksmanship, or Trump just faked another assassination attempt to get over a bad news cycle. I thought nothing of it. I was 3 sheets to the wind. I went to bed, 30,000 likes, and this time MAGA's pissed. They're pissed. And so they are linking my comment to the Secret Service and the FBI. And I think at some point, if there's enough people that are tagging the Secret Service and the FBI, there might be a threshold to which they feel like they need to visit you. Because lo and behold, I was sitting in this very tap room right here, and the Secret Service and the FBI came to visit me and asked me if I knew anybody that was plotting to kill the President of the United States. Now, luckily I had forewarning because they came to our Madison tap room first, because their Secret Service and FBI probably start in Madison. Well, I don't think they have an office up here, so they started there looking for me, and my beer tenders were like, Jesus, Kirk, what's going on? So I had called my lawyer already, and he's like, don't talk to him without me. So they got there, and I sent him away because my lawyer was getting back from a trial in Rhinelander. And in that time, between when they visited me and when they agreed to come back, I thought I was going to go to a detention center. I thought it was done. And for the first time in my life, I was afraid. I started actually being afraid of my federal government. I've been talking about it for a long time, but I'm not black or brown, and I don't live in Milwaukee, nor do I live in Chicago or the Twin Cities. And so I haven't actually felt what a lot of these folks have felt yet. But on that day I did, because I had an hour between then and visiting the first time to think about, well, what happens if I go to a detention center? Who do I call? And so I made this post that said, if you don't hear from me again, there are certain people in my life who will start posting on this Facebook site and tell you what's happening. And they will tell you who they are. But do not trust the government, do not trust the federal government, and do not trust any mainstream media who's reporting on this. Because unfortunately, they've been bought by the oligarchs. And that will lead us to muckraker, but I got to finish my phrase here. I got really pissed off at the FBI at that moment. And so we changed something we had done, and we called it MAGA tears 2 years ago. We called it fascist tears now. So we got eagle-eyed Kash Patel over here, who is crying, and we have Pete Hegseth, who's got all these tattoos. One of the tattoos says, I eat boogers, and the other tattoo says, douchebag on it. And then we have Carolyn Levitt, who every time she tells a lie, instead of her nose getting bigger, her cross gets bigger. And we say that on the back of our can over here. So that is Fascist Tears. It's the freshest beer we have, and I've talked too long. So pour the next beer, my friend, while I take a sip. Okay, so So the last beer we have, this one stands for the last president we have in our resistance movement. This is Teddy Roosevelt. You can see Teddy Roosevelt. He was a safari guy. He always went to African safaris and killed big game. So we got him in a safari hat, and he is typing out. He's acting like a muckraker. If you flip the can upside down, he's typing January 20th, 2025. Like Carnegie, Rockefeller, Morgan, and Vanderbilt did before them, current billionaires Musk, Bezos, Zuckerberg, and Thiel have now taken complete control of America's government by buying the Republican Party and installing a twice impeached convicted felon to America's highest office. We had the first Gilded Age, which was right around the turn of the century, and we had the richest of the rich that owned everything back then. We are now living in the second Gilded Age of America, where a few rich men own everything and the rest of us are having a really hard time making ends meet and getting things to work. And I say that because I'm a small business owner, and the small business owners might not be living paycheck to paycheck, but we're still part of the 99% that's not the uber wealthy in America. And the laws are definitely not made for us. They're made for the big corporations whose CEOs are the oligarchs of America. Small business is lumped together with the working class during this second Gilded Age. Do we have it as bad? No. But we have to join hands with those that do in order to get back some sort of equilibrium between the haves and the have-nots in our country. So back in the day, Roosevelt couldn't have broken the backs of the oligarchs 100 years ago unless he had the help of what I call muckrakers. And one of the muckrakers was a woman named Ida Tarbell, who wrote for McClure's Magazine, which was a monthly magazine, and she wrote about the plight of the working class. The one I know a lot more about is a guy named Upton Sinclair, who wrote The Jungle, which was about Polish immigrants moving to Chicago and working for a meat packing plant. So these are the conditions that he wrote about that helped overturn the first Gilded Age. These Polish immigrants had to buy homes that were built by the company because they were right next to the factory. Because the company cared about profits and profits only, they built the homes as shabbily as possible, and they were drafty in the middle of winters that are much colder than they are today in Chicago because we didn't have global warming back then. 2, these Polish immigrants had to shop at the grocery stores that were owned by that corporation, whose corporations was the only goal was to make as much in profits as they could. So of course, they served Spam in cans, which was supposed to be meat, and they put sawdust in those cans so that they could eke more profits out of that meat, which was completely not nutritious and sickened their workers. 3rd, if their worker went to the factory and somehow was injured, lots of knives and sharp things in a meatpacking plant, there was absolutely no safety net for if they got hurt. You weren't going to go to a hospital and get antiseptic back then, and if you couldn't work because you were injured, your family simply starved. And so that's what Upton Sinclair wrote about. And that book, along with Ida Tarbell's articles in McClure's Magazine, along with a bunch of other writers, helped convince America that we had to change. And it helped convince probably people who had voted for Calvin Coolidge before, because of course Rockefeller has to be smart because he's a gazillionaire. These guys have to be smart, and we should go with them. They know more than us. Of course not. They're greedy. They're not necessarily smarter than you or me. They just or they're just either luckier in life because of the station they grew, or they're greedy first and smart second. So that's how Roosevelt was able to beat the oligarchs was through the muckrakers. Now, in today's world, we have muckrakers as well. I would argue that our number one muckraker in America right now is Heather Cox Richardson, who is a professor from Boston University, who has, I think, taken a leave of absence because everyone reads what she writes every single day. Everybody who cares about getting some sort of centered news that's not propaganda reads Heather Cox Richardson's email every day. She started on a platform called Substack, and Substack has become the place to get independent media that is not state-run propaganda. I will tell you, CBS was bought by the Ellison family and Skylark. They fired Colbert and they've gutted CBS or 60 Minutes and CBS News. We no longer can trust CBS. The Washington Post, which was one of the two top national papers of record, the New York Times and the Washington Post, was bought by Jeff Bezos. He's gutted the Washington Post. We can no longer trust one of the top newspapers in the country to tell us what's really happening in America. Time Magazine was bought by Benioff, who owns Salesforce.com. We can no longer trust Time Magazine, even though I've never subscribed to Time Magazine. Twitter was bought by Elon Musk. It's become just a fascist cesspool. We can no longer trust Twitter for our news because the algorithm leans towards right-wing propaganda. Slowly but surely, our social media platforms and our mainstream media are being bought up by the oligarchs. And I'll just say, on my Facebook feed, all of these like regional news stations, like in Houston, in Appleton, around, somehow I get a lot of them, maybe because I'm political, they all reported without questioning once. The National Park Service reports that somebody took a knife to the Lincoln Memorial pool. The National Park Service reports. Did I read one statement from a journalist in a regional or local market saying, and that is disputed by every paint pool engineer in America because it didn't happen? I didn't read a single journalist who is being told what to write in the NBC, ABC, CBS world that works in smaller markets say, but we dispute that, or there's others that dispute that. It's just regurgitated as fact. That's what we're seeing in America now. That's why we have to find other outlets. And those other outlets are, a lot of them are Substack. The Midas Touch, Bill Acosta, who used to be on CNN, who was fired for being too hard against Trump. So he's now doing stuff. Now, believe it or not, there's a C- version of Heather Cox Richardson and the Midas Touch out there, and it's called the Minocqua Brewing Company Times. In the last year, we have ranked top 100 regularly among U.S. political platforms on Substack. We've hit top 50 probably 20 times. We even were top 5 once. I beat Dan Rather one day. And the reason I do that is because every time you buy a T-shirt or you buy, thanks, brother. Every time you buy anything, I get your email address. And sure as shit, I put that email address right in our Substack page, so you get our emails. But it's not just me asking you to buy our stuff. It's Patty Vasquez, who's a talk show host in Chicago, who writes on Mondays. It's Ben Cominos, who just got fired from WHBY in Appleton for being too progressive. He's writing full-time for us now, and you'll see him live for 2 hours a day starting next week. He's a progressive talk show host in Appleton and Oshkosh. It's a guy named Michael Yoakum, who is a session drummer for Jackson Browne and was in the band Korn, which is wild because he's one of the best writers I've ever read in life, and he played here in Park Falls like a month ago. Somebody told him about me. He reached out. And he's like, let's do something. I really respect what you're doing. I got this guy writing for me every Thursday, and then I write on Wednesday on Sundays, and so we're trying to get out what we're seeing as news, but not slanted in a propaganda way, and we're trying to read through the lines and give people what we think is really happening. It's not news; it's opinion, but because we're not journalists, but today's news is not news either. It's opinion for the other side. We are just where we were in the times of yellow journalism, where nothing meant anything and people were confused. And unfortunately, that's the way it's going to be until we can wrest power back and instill some integrity to journalism once again. So we have drank all of our stuff that's alcoholic today. And I didn't give you root beer or sparkling water. I apologize. I don't think any of you wanted that. So we are done with this tasting, but what I wanted to impart as a parting request was, if this small business in Minocqua can do this much for the resistance, surely when you go back home, you might be able to do what you can. And what you can do is awesome if you march on the No Kings marches. That's one really great thing, because it allows you to meet other people who are trying to become activists and trying to figure out what to do. But it's actually not enough just to march in a parade every 3 months, because that's great to network and figure out the next thing. But what's really happening on the front lines are people are buying whistles, and they're blowing whistles whenever ICE agents are coming to disappear people. And that's happening obviously only in places where the ICE agents are coming down with immigrants. If you live in a small town, that's not going to happen probably to you. But what's happening in the small town is that there are sheriffs in every rural county who have signed agreements with ICE to keep Mexican farm workers in jail longer so that ICE agents can come and pick them up when they're released. And if these sheriffs are kind of the Christian nationalist types, they might find a reason to put a Mexican farm worker in jail so that they can figure out a way to call ICE to get them back. So if you're coming from a small town, you should really figure out who your sheriff is and maybe try to get somebody else to run who's not going to be doing that. And obviously, education is the way that we can start becoming more media literate and knowing when they're lying to us, which means our public schools have to be great. Every small town is a public school district, and Moms for Liberty is this crazy hate group that has infiltrated Wisconsin's school districts, and they're hurting public schools and making it harder to learn about history and learn about fascism during World War II. So another thing to do is simply run for your school board and make sure your public schools are at least teaching kids what they need to know to become good resistance warriors, because we're going to need them later on. So thanks for everybody. I appreciate you sticking around and liking our beer. So thanks a lot. Take care. Cheers. I'm going to play that song I played in the beginning because it's fucking funny.